Hi guys, this is Aniko. This is my second video on defense in Star Wars: The Old Republic. In this video, I am going to specifically be talking about the types and varieties of defensive abilities that characters have. This video will be covering defensive abilities in very general terms. This is in part because I am not an expert in every single class and build, and even if I was, covering every possible class and every possible build would make this video far too long. If you have the time on your hands, I recommend reading and getting to know what each of your defensive abilities can do. Whatever you have, you're going to have to balance it with your attack rotation that we spoke about in the first video of this series. But if you don't have time to put all the pieces together yourself, and many of us don't, I will again suggest that you find a class guide and use it to help you learn about your defensive abilities. In the comments from the previous installment of the series, I had someone ask where to find class builds for 4.0. Another of my subscribers responded that Dolphy.net was the place to go, and I will echo that advice. You might also check on Reddit or the Star Wars Old Republic community forums of the official website to see if anyone has posted a class guide there. I should also add that if you do not see a 4.0 guide for your particular build anywhere, that you can still use the advice in the 3.0 guides for several of the classes to learn what you need to know. And if all else fails, educated queries in regards to specific classes and builds on the Fleet Public channel are often well received. If you happen to be part of a guild, you might try asking there for advice as well. Now, generally speaking, the defensive capabilities available to whichever class you're playing are meant to complement and work in harmony with your offensive abilities. Defensive abilities can be boiled down into a few major categories, and different classes will have different combinations of these abilities. These major categories are 1. Interrupts, 2. Defensive cooldowns, 3. Buffs, 4. Crowd control, and 5. Healing abilities. Generally speaking, every class has at least one interrupt, defensive cooldown, buff, and crowd control ability. Healer builds obviously will also have heals, and DPS builds that come out of these classes will have healing abilities as well. So, number 1, and the most important defensive ability of Star Wars: The Old Republic, interrupts. Interrupts are any ability which stops or interrupts the casting bar of an enemy. If you're wondering which of your abilities are interrupts, just check the description and you'll clearly see that it states something along the lines of interrupts the target's current action. Some classes have more than one ability that can cause an interrupt, but every class has at least one. Find it, know it, and love it. This is hands down the most important defensive skill you can know in Star Wars: The Old Republic. You can stop an enemy from hitting you with a massive attack using this ability. You can also stop an enemy from healing itself with this. Interrupts are your friends, and coincidentally, they are key to being able to solo that final boss in the Star Fortress. Something to keep in mind. Secondly, defensive cooldowns. Every class has at least one of these. These are pretty much the oh poop buttons you start pushing when things are clearly not going your way, and you need to buy yourself just a little more time to take down an enemy. These can take many forms in the game and are very class dependent. Some might heal you for a small amount over time. Some might increase your defensive stats for a little while. Some might temporarily increase your total hit points. But regardless of what exactly it does, you're going to want to know which defensive cooldowns you have and what they can do for you. Thirdly, buffs. These can sometimes be very similar to defensive cooldowns. All classes have at least one of these, and they are simply any ability that temporarily increases your attack abilities. These should generally be used right before you use your best, most damaging attacks to ensure you get the most damage for the cost of activating that buff. If you're playing a healer class, you probably have buffs not only for yourself, but also buffs that you can apply to many people in your group. In the case of healer types, you may also have defensive buffs which are different from defensive cooldowns, normally because you can cast these defensive buffs on other people. Fourthly, crowd control. FYI, crowd control is often shortened to just CC. So if someone asks you to CC something, you now know what they're talking about. All classes have at least one crowd control ability, but some classes specialize in it. Crowd control abilities are any ability which incapacitates or otherwise distracts an attacker for a period of time, such as flash bombs that blind, or earthquakes that make the attacker fall, or poison darts that leave an attacker reeling. You can use crowd control to split up a bigger group into smaller, killable chunks by buying you time to kill a few creatures while the others are, for example, flailing around because you hit them with some kind of flash bomb. For tank builds, crowd control can also take the form of taunts and maintaining aggro. Basically, you're distracting all the attackers into hitting you while your group or your NPC companion kills them off. Fifth, and lastly, healing abilities. If you're playing a healer build, a good class guide will not only give you an attack rotation, but also a healing rotation, and general advice about when to apply which buffs to group members. Advice which, FYI, can also be used on your NPC companions if you're playing solo. It's worth your while to learn this information so you can get the best bang out of your healing abilities. If you're a DPS build in a class that heals, you will also have some healing skills that are generally called off heals. You won't want to be reliant on these as they don't do a lot of healing, but when push comes to shove, they can sometimes pull you or your companion out of a tight spot. I recommend treating any off heals you might have like a defensive cooldown most of the time. And that's the crash course on defensive abilities. The takeaway here is to make sure you know your defensive abilities and know what they do, so that when you need them, you're not blindly mashing buttons and praying you don't die. You're not doing yourself any favors like that. So, that's all for this episode of Star Wars The Old Republic School. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them behind in the comments. I or another listener might have the answer you seek. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.